over to you members who are within the chamber and then those online.
Morning, Chairperson, and good morning to the professionals. I'm Member Boyson, and I'm an alternate member of this committee.
Welcome, Member Boyson, and then over to the virtual platform.
Morning, Chairperson. It's Dave Bryant, member of the committee.
I'm Thomas
morning,
Walters,
Chair.
member of the Provincial Parliament.
Morning, Chair. Member Stoffel. I'm a bit late, Chair. I'm almost in the chamber. All right, thanks, Chair.
Morning, Chair. Morning, colleagues. My name is Noko Masipa. I'm an alternate on this portfolio. Thank you.
Morning, everyone. Dr. Menon, member of the committee.
Good morning, Chairperson. Grant Marie, and I'm an alternate member of this committee. Thank you.
Thank you, members. I'm going to hand over to HOD. I know there's been an apology from a minister, and yes, so welcome to HOD and your team, and you're welcome to introduce the members of the team, and then we can move into the presentation that we have that has already been circulated, but it would be great if we can walk through that presentation. I think I'm very mindful of our time span and our time gap up till 12 o'clock. I know there are some other commitments that various members on the platform do have after 12 o'clock.
Good morning, Chair. Good morning, members. My name is Julinda Gantana, the head of the Provincial Treasury. The team will present themselves, but we also do have the service provider with us today, should the members have specific detail that was emanating from the support that we've gotten from the service provider. Thanks.
Good morning, Chair. Good morning, members. My name is Victor Sonna, the DDG for Fiscal and Economic Services. Thank you.
Good morning, Chair, and good morning to the members. My name is Owen Wilcox. I'm Chief Director of Public Policy Services.
Morning, Chair and members. I'm Malcolm Boyson, Senior Manager, Local Government Budget Office, Provincial Treasury.
Good morning. My name is Alex Kempthorne from Urban Econ. We are part of the consultant team working with Provincial Treasury.
Good morning, Chair. Nobahle Silulwane, Provincial Treasury Budget Office.
Good morning, Chair and members. Wesley Baikis from the Local Government Budget Office. Thank you.
Morning, Chair and members. I'm Thembela Nabe, Local Government Budget Office.
Morning, Chair and members and colleagues. My name is Fundisiwe Kwele from the Provincial Treasury, Local Government Budget Office. Thanks.
Morning, Chair. Ashley Rasool from the Provincial Treasury Budget Office.
Thank you very much. Just in relation to the screens, I see the screens have gone off again. I know they're working to get them back on, and they indicated probably within about 10 minutes after the start, we would have the screens up and running. Hopefully the audio is working for our online members.
Yes, Chair, we can hear you perfectly well.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Right, I think we, hopefully the audio is working well then. And I think if, just from presentation point of view, that we just make sure that audio comes through just on the mics, because I think just the presenters perhaps bringing their mic down to an angle that everybody can hear. Okay, I think we can hand over then to you, HOD, and for the presentation.
Thank you, Chair. I'm hoping that the members will have the presentation with, and I'm going to ask the presenters, because we are having a little bit of a tag team, just by way in which we are. We've divided the various districts amongst the economists. And I'm going to ask, whilst the screens are not working, that the team members just indicate that they are now moving to the next slide when they are done. Thanks.
Yes, procedural officer.
Need copies of the presentation for your staff?
No, we good. We're good. We do have.
IT has said that if you do present via the link, as I have indicated, it will be broadcast to the members online while they work in the background. We do apologize that the screens are not working, but ICT is busy with it.
Noted. I think we can start. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Chairperson, for the opportunity to come and present the Municipal Economic Review and outlook for the City of Cape Town, the West Coast, as well as Central Karoo District. As members are aware, the MERO provides a district-level analysis that highlights the economic performance, employment trends, growth opportunities, risk, as well as key policy consideration across these three municipal regions. I think the central finding that colleagues will go through now from the MERO analysis is that the economic growth patterns across the three regions that we are presenting, they remain uneven, but each region possesses distinct competitive advantages that can support growth, employment creation, and increase economic resilience if supported by appropriate policy intervention as well as infrastructure investment. I think some of the cross-cutting themes that will be coming through the presentation that the team is going to present include one, that infrastructure investment across the three regions, it remains critical for sustaining economic growth as well as improving competitiveness. And secondly, that skills development must be aligned with future industry requirements, particularly in digital technology as well as green economy sectors. Water security as well as climate resilience are increasingly important economic considerations across the three regions that will be presented. And also that efficient logistics system, including ports, rail, and freight networks, are essential to support exports and regional development. And lastly, that inclusive growth as well as job creation remains the most important socio-economic priorities across the three regions. As HOD has already indicated, Chair, the presentation will be shared by three presenters. Ashley is going to start on the City of Cape Town, then Malcolm will do the West Coast, and then Keith will do the last one. Ashley.
Thank you, Victor. If I could commence on slide 4 for members online, looking at the GDPR and jobs overview. I think it's important to note from the city's perspective, or from the city's presentation and the numbers that I'm about to present over here, that the city basically depicts the economic climate and landscape of the province. That is not an isolated, it's not an isolated factor for the Western Cape. It's the historical sort of makeup of the economy in South Africa. Your economic centers are centered around the metros, and so by that, I mean that might seem to be common knowledge, but by that it means that there's more emphasis placed on the economies of metros, and in this instance, in the City of Cape Town, the performance and the factors affecting that economic performance within the city, trickling down to the socio-economic implications of those indicators, becomes all the more important, because more often than not, those trends are mirrored across the province. And ultimately, a functioning economy from a regional perspective is accessibility. Access to markets is the key thing. The efficiency of access to markets. So from a supply perspective, what is the cost of getting of producing goods and then getting those goods to market, because ultimately that affects the business decision, and there's a trickle-down effect onto employment, growth of the sector or non-growth or regression of the sector, and then whether you have an increase, or ultimately whether you have an increase in employment. Employment being important, obviously, for access to the economy, the ability and the ability to pay for municipal goods and services. And so that's that whole circular economy effect, which comes back around again to municipal budgets and ultimately why we're here today. I just wanted to give context to all of that. So if we look at that on slide 4, we look at the GDP and sort of jobs overview for the city of Cape Town. It further backs my point with we have a 72% contribution to the Western Cape GDP or coming out of the metro. So that's unusually skewed and high from a global benchmark perspective. It's not going to change in the near future, but it certainly alludes to more importance of the performance of the city or of the city's economy. Jobs employed is at 1.6 million, with a contribution to employment at 62.8% across the province, sitting within the city. So what you have there is what that gives rise is to typical urban economics, where you have high densification. You have basically, if we look at the map over there, we have our economic centers centered around sort of the Table Bay CBD area, and then in Bellville. And naturally, that's the center of the economy. The sectors that affects is your high to mid-skilled sectors. The issues come around that, where you have your sort of lower middle and lower skilled workers, and the impoverished on the outskirts of the city, with very little economic activity. And I think therein lies the soft underbelly of the city. The city as an economic indicator for the country is massive. Yes, we have the minerals in Gauteng, and we have the trade ports and the trade routes through KZN. But in terms of the city's knowledge economy approach, and also being the financial services hub to a certain degree in the country, it's the match and the balance of play between employability and GDPR performance, because GDPR growth without labor absorption is nothing. If anything, that it exacerbates inequality, social ills, etc., and that rears its ugly head in protests and basically social unrest from a socio-economic perspective. Moving over to the next slide, which looks at the City of Cape Town's growth trend. I think this mirrors all districts, as my colleagues will present after me, in terms of the overall economic growth trend of regions across the country, but especially of the metro. We had a V-shaped recession, strong recovery post-COVID. It's been well documented. That's almost by default, as most pandemics globally show that strong rebound. But if I can just allude to what my GDG mentioned in terms of infrastructure and the underbelly of an economy, the sustainability and the longevity of an economy to rebound from an industrialization perspective. So the ability for an economy to grow will by and large dwell on two things, and that is skills, the level of skill of labor, and therefore the labor absorption of that labor into key sectors that are growing, and the infrastructure, because infrastructure underpins economic performance. I mean, that's been well documented in economic research. Okay, we do see a steep flattening of growth post-COVID to 2024 of 0.4%. There's been a slight uptick of 1.2. I think, to put it into perspective, your powerhouse economic regions from a spatial perspective to drive regional economies need to be at a level of 3% and above. This is not a dig at the city, but I think in terms of the South African economy, we have an economy that is not growing, yet we have the labor pool or your job seeker pool is growing year on year. So your demographics, and with the city in particular, what you find is you'll have an inward migration of net job seekers, but not necessarily the economic opportunities to absorb them, and therein lies the problem. And it's specifically because it's not your highly skilled at which that issue lays at from an unemployment perspective. It's at your middle to low end job market. And then if you give the spatial layout in terms of the map of the previous slide, you then see the problem that we have in the city is that on the outer network, the outskirts of this economy, in terms of the topography of the city, access to the economy it remains an issue. Moving forward, if I can move to slide 7, which looks at the sectoral GDPR performance and forecasting, it basically entrenches what I've introduced and stated earlier as to the shape of this economy, is that the city's economy differs marginally differs slightly from your non-metro municipalities. So when in our economic analysis, we'll have we have metro and non-metro. Metro is essentially all municipalities, the B and district municipalities lying beyond the mountain ranges that we see. We have sectors such as finance at 1.8%, the tertiary sector. If I can just give it in terms of the broad sense without digging it down a bit too much in the question and answer, we can go a bit deeper. But essentially, the city's economy is underpinned on the tertiary sector. That's transport, storage, communication, and finance. Okay, that drives the economy of the metro and of the Western Cape. Highly skilled sector with low labor absorption. And now, given the digital presence of that sector and the maturity of that sector, you could essentially be sitting in the south of France running an asset management company in Clermont. So I don't want to sound disingenuous, but for me as a development economist, the big winners in your secondary and your primary sector. And in the city, given its makeup as a metro, the secondary sector in terms of manufacturing, construction is where basically the economy will either be won or lost in the near future. I'll get into those numbers later on, but we can see that manufacturing, which has got a huge comparative advantage and is a huge role player in the city, has only contributed 0.1% from 2021 to 23. It's not forecasted to grow at any significant rate going forward. And the same can be said for construction, which is estimated or forecasted to actually contract. And therein lies the problem. If we move on to slide 8, we look at sectoral employment performance. In a nutshell, we've had 59,000 jobs gained, 36 lost with a net job gain of 22. So that is a big positive. I do want to state that the metro's performance in this regard from an unemployment perspective outstrips all other metros nationally. However, the number, the 22,661, given the demographic profile of the city, is not nearly enough to attack the unemployment and that sort of soft underbelly that we have. Poverty, GDP per capita incomes, which in the city have declined at a faster rate than any of the other municipalities in the Western Cape over the last 10 years. So we have essentially what that means in layman's English is that households are becoming poorer. We can move on to the next slide. Looking at the principal sectors, major employers and strengths. Strong growth drivers, as I've mentioned, and it's historically been like this, given the knowledge economy, the well-structured economy from a technological perspective and maturity. It's finance and business services, logistics and tourism, given the port. It's a strong growth driver, but as has been documented in recent times, it's also an area for future growth. Stable employment drivers as your retail and hospitality, your public services. Again, those two sectors don't get me very excited because ultimately you're looking at labor absorption of your lower middle income and your low skilled workers. And that segment of the economy, which is on the outskirts from the topography perspective of the city, falls unfortunately in sectors under pressure, and that is manufacturing and construction. I think a lot of economists can sort of woodwink you with jargon, but ultimately, if you want to turn an economy around, or even a regional economy around, it ultimately starts with manufacturing. In any society, whether that's first world or the developing economy, and those sectors are under pressure, as stated earlier, and therein lies the problem. If I look at comparative advantages to back up what I'm saying, comparative advantages looks at which sectors are favorable given a whole host of factors, which I'm not going to go into, but it's measured in an LQ ratio, and the LQ ratio spelled out is the location quotient, and what that means, again, to keep it as simple as possible, is that when it's a composite index, all right, so it's a whole host of factors that come together and it gives you an index. That index needs to be more than one to essentially mean that that sector is worth its while in a regional space, okay? And so the LQ ratio, the LQ quotient, is favorable in your tertiary sector. But again, I don't want to focus too much on that because that drives the economy. If I'm honest, there's very little that local or provincial government can do to that sector because it's very matured. It's highly skilled, high knowledge sector with strong IT focus. So labor is mobile is what I'm getting to. It's that secondary sector over there. And to reiterate my point, manufacturing is at 1.13, which is strong. Construction is even stronger at 1.35. Yet on the previous slide, I've highlighted the sectors that's under pressure and its contribution to, or its recent contribution to the economic performance of the city. Next slide, which looks at the regional sectoral GDPR contributions to the province. We see the importance of manufacturing within the Cape Metro at 11%, and construction at 2.6%. Naturally, a inner city urban economy is not going to be strong in your primary sector, as that's normally found sort of beyond the scope of an inner city urban economy. So that's basically your non-metro municipalities, but it's manufacturing and construction again in terms of its contribution. Trade, vitally important. This is where your infrastructure mega projects become important. Again, the much publicized need for expansion of the port and a functional port. I can't reiterate that enough in terms of what that means to this economy. Much publicized second airport that's now supposedly on its way is another plus factor. But again, it's about how do we link the low income and middle income, non-skilled to those economic opportunities and the economic value chains that those infrastructure mega projects presents. And you got finance again there at 28.5%. But I said, again, that figure treated, or we know the business is registered in Claremont, but the deals take place in Sainton or in the south of France or wherever. So your labor profile of that market is highly mature, very mobile. I'll stop there. GDPR, jobs and performance. If I look at that slide, we look at GDPR, employment and growth, and the unemployment rate. We see that change in employment has actually been under pressure since COVID, pre-COVID and post-COVID. Currently, from the 2024 figure that we have, it's at 24,000 net job losses. This is for the period 2014 to 2024, so it's a 10-year time series that I'm referring to over here. Your GDPR growth, I've been through that. You see that V-shaped recession from about 2019, 2020 COVID, moderate economic recovery. Then you look at your unemployment rate. Again, outperforms all metros across the country, yes, but at 25% for an economy wishing to grow and to increase prosperity for citizens, increase GDP per capita incomes, that unemployment rate is still markedly high. Closing off, growth, the slide looking at growth prospects and employment opportunities, finance and digital economy at the top with tourism, logistics and trade. Won't delve too much into that. I think the new big plus in terms of where the global economy is going is the green economy, and where we see the city positioning itself especially from a manufacturing perspective within that green economy. It does mean that it's a new opportunity, but it comes also with new requirements, and that's ultimately where your skills development strategies should be leaning towards, and that's from your high school right through to your FET colleges, to align with that economy, to make full use of that. And Cape Town is favorably positioned for that. I think the comparative advantages and the research that has gone into that further backs up my point. Infrastructure and construction is another one from a soft underbelly perspective as to, you know, how do we reintegrate these major economic drivers, purely because they historically they show high levels of labor absorption. If I move into the slide which looks at your SWOT analysis in the Cape Petro, just flying through it, as I round off, the strengths are that it's the city is the provincial economic engine, at 72%, and it's 63% of provincial employment. It's a diversified service economy. It has a strong innovation. It has strong innovation ecosystem supported by the universities, research institutions, fintech, business processing, and highly skilled workforce. Hence, it has sort of copped the term the knowledge economy, not misplaced. It has a competitive manufacturing and logistics sector. However, those sectors are impacted, or their performance is impacted by the factors of production, and that is capital, labor, electricity, water, etc., etc. And if any of those are not at an efficient level for those sectors to grow, businesses just go somewhere else. Essentially, they close up shop and that's it. The weaknesses are that it's got high unemployment at 25.2. There are net job losses of 24,000, which is notable. There's persistent spatial inequality with significant disparities between the affluent economic nodes and the disadvantaged communities on the outskirts of the city. The high housing costs and affordability constraints remains an issue. Port and rail inefficiencies underpin the economic development potential of any economy, and that remains an issue within the city of Cape Town. And then the low-skilled workers, as I've mentioned, remain vulnerable on the outskirts of the economy. Opportunities, as I explained, is to expand the green economy, capitalize on tourism recovery, and to accelerate infrastructure investment. To close off threats, weak national economic growth, we need to understand that a lot of the economic policy options that shape an economy, trade, finance, manufacturing, etc., fall at the national level. And in terms of the national policies that are undertaken from DTI, Treasury, etc., crime and safety concerns persist, not only in the city but across the province, but certainly within the city. Climate change and water stresses is real, and I think it's particularly real given the dry winter months that we've now currently had and the knock-on effect that has. Water is a key input production or input source for manufacturing. Fiscal constraints with budgets, with public budgets dwindling, and then port delays and logistic bottlenecks reduce the export potential and the competitiveness of products produced within the city getting to market, as I mentioned in my opening slide. I'd like to close off over there, if I may, because I think I've captured everything. I'm done yet. Well, the last slide is the key implications for policy planning and budgeting. If I just shoot through this in 30 seconds, not that I don't want to give it the importance that it deserves. Poverty reduction needs to be a key priority. Population growth is notable, and the city will always, being the top performing economy in the region, it's a victim of its own success with an inward migration pattern. Hence the demand for basic services, for houses, etc., etc. But where do you house them? How do you provide the services? And in providing those services to households, do those households have the affordability and the ability to pay? So those remain question marks. There are rising energy costs, which remain a problem. Water, another issue. Self-financing for infrastructure investment. becomes a key policy option to consider. Skills development and education, especially in locking in those on the outskirts of the economy, on the outskirts of the city, as I've mentioned earlier. And then lastly, international trade, tourism, and the informal sector. I think a key economic issue and something that as a country, and I want to close off on this point, needs to be a consideration, and I don't think we've got it quite right yet, is how do we link second economy to first economy opportunities? That gap is still, if anything, that gap is growing. We see that in the upper bound poverty lines. So there's definitely a wider the inequalities in society. Effectively, so essentially what I'm saying is, how do you bring the informal sector to be understand it? How do you bring that closer to the formal economy and integrate it into the key economic value chains? Thank you.
Thank you, Chairperson. We can now proceed to the West Coast District. And we can proceed to the slide on the GDPR and jobs. So the West Coast District is the first non-metro district that we're presenting. It is a mid-size economy, so it finds itself wedged between the larger Cape Winelands and Garden Route regional economies, and in the smaller Overberg in Central Karoo economies. Nonetheless, the West Coast made a meaningful contribution to the Western Cape economy and contributed 47.1 billion rand in GDPR, or 5.1% of the Western Cape economy. It further supports 182,000 jobs, and indicating also that the West Coast has a higher contribution to jobs relative to its economic contribution at 7.1% of the provincial employment. So in essence, this highlights the district's role as an important regional economic contributor in the main agriculture, logistics, and industrialization. Spatially, the district is divided into the north and the south, and what you find is the larger local economies is closely situated to the metro, in particular Saldanha Bay and Swartland municipality. So Saldanha Bay contributed the largest share to the West Coast District economy at 32%, or 15.2 billion rand, and almost 28% of the total employment at almost 51,000 jobs. Next is Swartland, which contribute 26.4% of the GDPR and 25.7% of the employment at almost 47,000 jobs. Again, highlighting the importance and the diversified economy. In this case, Swartland benefits from a strong agricultural base linked to agro-processing, logistics, and again, its proximity to the Cape Town metro market. Combined, Saldanha and Swartland account for nearly 59% of the total GDPR of the district and 54% of the district employment, indicating a clear spatial concentration of economic activity in the south. This concentration reflects infrastructure advantages, industrial clustering, and strong investment and attraction to these specific areas. To the north, Bergrivier, Machikama, and Cederberg also plays an important supporting economic role, and these three economies contribute between 12.8% and 14.4% of the district GDPR, with an employment contribution that range between 14.6% to 16.4%. Their economies differ from the ones in the south, as these are largely driven by agriculture, also agri-processing, and also a strong tourism element. And these then support the regional economies, stability, and rural employment. Next slide. So what we see in this slide is a similar trend to the city of Cape Town, and that would also be the same story for the Western Cape, where there's a recovery after COVID, and then growth flattening, and then recovering. So this slide represents the real GDPR of the district from 2020 to 2025-26, which is the outlook. Still a forecast at the time. And the overall story is one of economic volatility with a sharp post-pandemic rebound, gradual slowing growth, and a return to a contraction in 2024, and then a modest recovery then forecasted for 25-26. The district appears to be resilient given its ability to recover strongly after a downturn. However, what it also highlights is highly dependent on a few key sectors in the main agriculture and tourism. There are, however, structural constraints in the main water, which then prevents the district from achieving high economic growth or medium economic growth above 3%. Nonetheless, the economy is forecasted to recover modestly and expected to grow by 1.2%, but that would still remain far below the peak that it achieved in 2020. Then the next slide speaks to the comparative advantages, and my colleague Ashley has explained the concept of location quotient. And what we're trying to advocate to municipalities is always to focus on these areas where you've got a high location quotient and comparative advantage, so that you can then diversify your economy and build your economy around that. So in the case of the West Coast, the primary sector is a very high DPR and 3.6 of employment. Again, this shows an extremely strong specialization, confirming the core economic foundations of the district. The secondary sector has also a strong location quotient at 1.37 and comparative advantage. In this regard, manufacturing stands out as a mature and growing sector, highlighting the importance of industrial activity, closely linked to agro-processing, Saldanha and Swartland as industrial hubs. The tertiary sector has a location quotient of 0.72 of GDPR and 0.67 of employment, meaning that the district less specialized in these services compared to the national economy or the provincial economy. But this also suggests an opportunity for growth. Transport, storage, and communication is identified as an emerging sector. While its comparative advantage is still developing, its growth reflects a potential strategic direction, specifically with regards to port, infrastructure, and logistics. We've also noted over the past decade a heavy investment in the N7 corridor. And agriculture and trade, while strong, are identified as mature sectors, but slightly losing ground. Other sectors such as construction, electricity, and finance show low comparative advantages. And this then highlights the importance of investing in skills development and infrastructure that could potentially strengthen the competitiveness and support for long-term growth. Next slide. So this slide basically provides a concise strategic overview of the district economy organized into 3 dimensions. In terms of its competitive advantage, the major employment bases, and the emerging opportunities and risk. The slide effectively highlights that the district's economy is built around agriculture, fishing, logistics, manufacturing, and with Saldanha as the industrial center, while positioning renewable energy and green hydrogen as future growth engines. Next slide. Next slide. So this slide highlights the West Coast district's regional contribution to the provincial GDPR. And what we can see is that the West Coast contribute the key sectors that the West Coast had a significant contribution to the provincial economy is particularly agriculture at 2.1%, trade at 0.8%, manufacturing at 0.7%, finance at 0.7%, and mining and quarrying at 0.6%. Again, this confirms the West Coast remain largely a production-based economy, based in the primary sector, which is then driven by natural resources in the main agriculture, fishing, logistics, and industrial activity. Next slide. When we compare the the GDPR and jobs performance between 2014 and 2018, GDPR growth remained positive but moderate, and in fluctuating between 0.9 and 3.9%. What that highlights is a relatively low growth environment. However, growth slowed down in 2019, just before the pandemic, signaling emerging structural pressures before the pandemic. In 2020, the district recorded contraction of 1.5% and a significant employment contraction of 12,000 jobs, and the largest decline over the period. Although GDPR rebounded strongly in 2021, employment remained under pressure with a further 4,900 job losses, showed a lagged labor market recovery. From 2022 to 23, there has been a strong recovery phase with the GDPR ranging between 3.1 and 1.5%, and there has also been significant employment gains of 8,800 and 9,700 respectively. However, in 2024, there's been renewed economic pressure with a contraction of 0.6% and job losses of 1,300, suggesting moderate growth condition. Although the employment rate improved from the 2021 peak, it remained elevated at 14.3% in 24% above the pre-pandemic levels. And this indicates while output recovered more quickly, the labor market absorption remains constrained, posing structural employment challenges in the district. But it's still well below the unemployment levels that we experience in the country. Next slide. So this slide highlights the GDPR performance and its forecast. So the tertiary sector recorded the strongest overall performance, particularly transport, storage, and communication at 10.2% growth, coupled with strong employment growth in trade at 5.2% and transport at 5.2%. Agriculture contributed the largest share to the district's GDPR at 21.4%, highlighting the structural significance. And however, the sector experienced a contraction of 2.5%, while employment increased by 4%. The construction at 3.2% and electricity at 1.6% recorded output declines despite moderate employment growth levels, and this may suggest constrained infrastructure investment and project delays, which may limit broader economic expansion and investment momentum. Between 2021 and 2024, the district overall grew by 1.3%, while employment increased by 3.5%, indicating economic growth has been relatively labor absorbing. This shows the dominance, particularly of the service and agricultural sectors, which tend to be more employment intensive compared to capital intensive industries. Next slide. So this slide basically look at the overall employment performance for the district in 2024. The district recorded job gains of 5,438 and job losses of 4,368, resulting in net job losses of 1,243. The largest gains were recorded in the agricultural subsectors, particularly vegetables and melons, citrus, and this also then again highlights the significance of the agricultural sector as a major employment generator in the district. The technical and vocational sector had 539 jobs in processing and preserving of fruit and vegetables, 430 jobs against. These sectors also showed growing demand for skills development and value-added agricultural production. Overall, the employment contribution or growth is being driven by agriculture, education, and selected services sectors, while more volatile and specialized service sectors are experiencing employment contraction. The concentration of employment growth in the agriculture and selected service activities indicates limited sectoral diversification in job creation, reinforcing the importance of diversifying the district's economic base to enhance economic resilience to deal with future specific sector shocks. Next slide. In terms of the SWOT analysis of the district, the key emerging theme across the four quadrants is that the district possesses strong natural logistics and industrial assets, but its future growth depends on overcoming infrastructure, skills, and climate-related constraints. The West Coast is an export-oriented regional economy, and it's got a positive trade surplus of almost 7.3 billion rand. And the key foundations is the agricultural and agro-processing, fishing, aquaculture, manufacturing, logistics, and many maritime activities. And then the future sector is the renewable energy. The district's competitive advantage is strengthened by the strong industrial bases in Saldanha and Swartland, which positions it as one of the Western Cape's most important industrial and export corridors. Then just some of the takeaway points. Next slide. For the Mero, specifically with regards to the West Coast District, it's a strategically important production and export region. Its main sectors, again, is agriculture, fishing, manufacturing, and maritime. Agriculture remaining the backbone of the district. There's potential for renewable energy. Logistics and transport play a key role, particularly with regards to investments in the port and also along the N7. And there's also a huge manufacturing potential. Tourism continue to diversify the district economy and providing some resilience to the district economy. Employment growth remains a challenge. Despite the strong productive sectors, unemployment, particularly amongst the youth and lower skilled workers, remains a structural issue, and that is across the country. Although agriculture and mining related industries remain important, the district is encouraged to continue diversifying its manufacturing, logistics, and the renewable energy and its maritime economy. Closing off with regards to the key implications for policy and planning. Again, a key emphasis to prioritize logistics and port infrastructure investment, to prioritize the West Coast as an energy hub and accelerate the industrialization of the port, build climate resilience into municipal infrastructure, broaden and strengthen agricultural competitiveness, and then also align skills development with future industries, and then key to focus on improving municipal infrastructure and asset management as a support to the economy. Thank you. Keith will now do the Central Karoo. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairperson and members. The Central Karoo has unique characteristics. It's seen as the Western Cape's inland frontier economy, though the smallest, economically speaking, only contributing 0.8% to the provincial GDPR. It's small in scale, spatially dispersed, climate sensitive, but strategically positioned around the N1 corridor. Agriculture, tourism, and emerging renewable energy are some of the opportunities that is presented to this district. Some of the further characteristics of the Central Karoo is the large geographical area, which implies higher infrastructure and service delivery costs, a small population base, implying limited local consumer demand, highly dependent on agriculture, which makes it vulnerable to drought and climate change. In terms of this slide, in 2024, the Central Karoo district economy was concentrated in 3 municipal areas: Beaufort West, which contributed 3.2 billion GDPR to and 12,314 jobs to the Central Karoo's economy. Prince Albert, 750 million, 3,884 jobs, and Laingsburg, 652.4 million, with 2,962 jobs contributing to the region's economy. Beaufort West is clearly the anchor, accounting for nearly 70% of the district's GDPR. Starting with the COVID shock in 2020, the Central Karoo district economy contracted in 2020, losing 1,600 jobs, then recovered in output during 2021, 22, and 2023. However, by 2024, GDPR contracted again by 1.3%, and employment declined by 293 jobs, showing that recovery remains fragile and vulnerable to drought, weak demand, and limited diversification. Next slide. The slide on comparative advantages. The Central Karoo's comparative advantage, as the colleagues explained, lies in its agricultural base, strategic location, and public service functions. However, the district faces the challenge of diversifying its economy and reducing its dependence on a limited number of sectors. The key message is that the Central Karoo is not a high growth economy, but a stability and resilience economy. Services, agriculture, and government dominate. Personal services, finance, transport, and general government provide stability, while agriculture and construction remain under pressure from drought, weak investment, and infrastructure constraints. Next slide. The district's main strengths lies in agriculture and agribusiness, particularly sheep farming, livestock production, fodder crops, and meat processing. Tourism and national heritage, driven by the Karoo National Park, heritage attractions, and growing astrotourism opportunities linked to the SKA. Its strategic location with the N1 corridor and rail network positioning the district as a gateway between the Western Cape and the country's interior. Employment in the district remains concentrated in government and community services, including education, healthcare, and municipal administration, agriculture and farming enterprises, tourism and hospitality, and retail and related services. Future growth opportunities include renewable energy projects, particularly solar and wind energy, transport, freight, and logistics services along the N1 corridor, agro-processing and value-added agricultural products, the digital economy, remote working, and tourism diversification. And next slide. In terms of the regional sectoral GDPR contributions, the Central Karoo contributes only a small share to provincial GDPR, as explained, but it performs critical strategic functions as a transport gateway, agricultural producer, and tourism destination. Next slide. This slide illustrates the relationship between economic growth, employment creation, and unemployment in the Central Karoo over the past decade. It demonstrates how external shocks, particularly the COVID-19 pandemic, affected both economic output and jobs, while also highlighting the district's subsequent recovery and structural challenges that remain. Next slide. Growth prospects and employment opportunities. This slide identifies the sectors that have the greatest potential to drive future economic growth and job creation in the Central Karoo. It demonstrates that while agriculture remains the foundation of the district's economy, new opportunities are emerging in renewable energy, logistics, tourism, and infrastructure development. The employment message is that the Central Karoo is labor constrained and opportunity constrained. Youth employment is concentrated in public administration, retail, fuel services, accommodation, and agriculture. This creates entry-level jobs, but limited pathways into higher skilled or higher paying work. Next slide. The Central Karoo's economic outlook remains positive but fragile. While agriculture is expected to drive the short-term recovery, long-term economic sustainability will depend on diversification, infrastructure investment, and reducing of the district's vulnerability to climate and economic shocks. Next slide. The next slide illustrates the sectors that created jobs and those that shed jobs in 2024, while certain sectors such as construction, retail, and security services generated new employment opportunities. These gains were outweighed by substantial job losses in government, agriculture, and hospitality, resulting in a net loss of 510 jobs across the district. The district's labor market remains fragile, with employment gains in some sectors more than offset by losses in others. Next slide. In terms of the SWOT analysis, to summarize the strengths and weaknesses and threats and opportunities, the slide indicates that economic diversification, investment attraction, and climate resilience are critical to unlocking sustainable growth and employment opportunities within the Central Karoo district. Next slide. The key takeaway points for Central Karoo's future prosperity depends on balancing its traditional agricultural strengths with economic diversification, renewable energy development, and tourism expansion, while addressing critical challenges related to water security, unemployment, infrastructure investment, and demographic change, not democratic. Slide 13, or the next one, relating to key implications for policy planning and budgeting. Firstly, economic diversification should remain a central policy priority by expanding renewable energy, tourism, agri-processing, and logistics activities. The district's strategic location along the N1 corridor provides a unique opportunity to strengthen trade, transport, and investment linkages. Secondly, water security and climate resilience must be prioritized in municipal planning and infrastructure budgets, given the district's vulnerability to drought and climate change. Without reliable water infrastructure, economic growth and agricultural productivity will remain constrained. Strengthening agricultural competitiveness through value addition and agro-processing can increase productivity, expand export opportunities, and support rural livelihoods. At the same time, tourism should be further developed as an inclusive growth sector that creates employment and leverages the district's unique heritage and natural assets. Finally, future growth depends on strategic municipal infrastructure investment and skills development that are aligned with emerging industries such as renewable energy and green technologies. Achieving these objectives will require strong collaboration between all spheres of government, municipalities, the private sector, and local communities. Thank you.
Thank you very much for those presentations. I think that certainly provides a very good insight. To me, the terms labor absorption and manufacturing aspects come through very clearly. And I guess, looking at the weaknesses, the opportunities, and the threats, when one does that analysis, how one tackles those. But I think at this stage, we can perhaps just break for tea or for coffee for 15 minutes, and then the members can have an opportunity to raise questions or some of their inputs that they might have. And, perhaps just thinking about what I've now just mentioned, those are the big thorny issues that we need to tackle. And ultimately, I suppose, sitting from a budget committee perspective is, what else should we be promoting? How do we move the needle in effect to ultimately improve employment and to improve the economy? So I think we can, to me, it looks like we can perhaps just have a break up till 10:20. That's about 15 minutes. And then we'll all be back here. And I'm looking at those of you on the platform. It is Wednesday, so no doubt you will have coffee. And Wednesdays is probably something to eat, whether it'll be milk tart or scones or something like that you will have on the online system. We will go down the passage and see what we have on offer today. So thank you very much for the participation. See you at 10:20. officials who are having their last sip of coffee or tea at this stage. So we'll just give them a minute or two and then we'll recommence.
Thanks, Chair. Noted.
I think we are ready to go. So I'm going to invite members of the committee to pose any questions or input into the session that we have just had and the presentations that we received on the Metro, on the West Coast and on the Central Karoo. I think if we can just see if there are hands, we've got Member Honourable Petrus, whose hand is up. So you're the first one to pose your question, Member Petrus.
Thank you, Chairperson, and thank you for the presentations. Chair, I want to know what is the contribution and the role of the in growth and job creation, and what is classified as the informal sector. Thank you, Chair.
Sorry, Member Petrus, if you could just repeat that. I think we didn't quite catch the beginning of what you stated there.
Yes, Chair. Chair, I want to know what is the role and the contribution of the informal sector in growth and job creation, and what is classified as the informal sector. What do we see? What sectors do we see as the informal sector?
But as I understand it, you're referring to the informal sector and the role that
Yes,
the informal sector has played. Fine, thank you. Thank you very much for that. Then we have Member Bryant and Member Nkondlo and then Member Stoffel.
Thanks very much, Chair. And thank you for those two presentations. I mean, Chair, I think the presentation on the Metro in particular, I think raises a couple of key questions that perhaps we are battling with, not only in Cape Town and the Western Cape, but I think in South Africa and probably across the world, is the cost of living and how it is becoming more and more expensive for average households to make ends meet, with so many households now inevitably ending up paying for their expenses through incurring debt. And Chair, as much as we are proud of the fact that our province is the leader when it comes to reducing unemployment, I think my main concern would be ensuring that over the next few years we put as much of an emphasis as possible on ensuring that the jobs that we create are both sustainable, but also these are jobs that can be translated into real potential for people to build lives, and the support that the Western Cape government is currently providing is also certainly going a long way. But I really think the more that people are resorting to getting themselves into debt to deal with the increasing cost of living, and as I say, these are factors from a broad variety of areas, from global economic challenges, wars in the Middle East and in Europe, and all sorts of other factors. But I really think we need to be laser focused on ensuring that we do everything we can to drive down the cost of living. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Member Bryant. Over to you, Member Nkondlo.
Thank you so much, Chair, and thank you for the presentation. I would like to know from the Treasury what has changed if you consider this particular mirror and the previous ones. I hear, I think the introduction that was provided that I think provides, I think two issues I took there in the introductory remarks that we made, Chair, is looking at the economy of the province, the challenges of the economy of the province, and how I think two things that they require fiscal policy interventions and infrastructure investment. Interesting issues to consider. Now, first thing, HOD, if one considers what has happened between the three municipalities that you are presenting here, how far are these municipalities, in your analysis, to help the province realize the 4 to 6% economic growth projection of the G4J, including the number of jobs? And I say this because I think the issue raised by Member Bryant of sustainable jobs is one issue that we often become very silent on. We speak about the number of jobs, but we're not speaking about the quality of those jobs. Because if the presumption is made that the jobs, as it was said earlier on, that an economy must provide jobs so that people are able to pay for services, for this and that and the other. The point is, in the discussion, you can't therefore avoid the quality of the job. Whether indeed, when the jobs are there and we celebrate them, they do what is required in that economy. So I'm asking that because for me, that would be some of the indications. The spend on the marrow is not for its own sake, it's for us to see whether indeed our economy is growing. So I'm asking, when we look at the dips into, the employment numbers and the growth, I think between 2020 and 2024, whether the projections that we've made, when we look at them, are we going to be able to realize that? That's the first thing. The second one, I think, coming back to the issue of growth, in the analysis done around the employment in these three municipalities, have incomes in these sectors increased? What has been the situation of incomes? And it comes back to the issue of quality of the job, so that we are able to see when the different sectors are performing and are, creating jobs, are we seeing any increase in incomes for those that are putting, their services into the labor market? And that is linked to the cost of living. So if I can get some clarity around that. And indeed, as I think Member Brengase has asked, if I'm not mistaken, Chair, is the first person who asked. I'm very concerned about the informal sector or informal economy, because the duality of the provincial economy, which mirrors the national economy, particularly the city. We talk about a city that's contributing about 73% into the GDP of the province. And we know they're currently, you're talking about almost 22% unemployment there. So nobody's telling us, how are these other people surviving? What is the data telling us? How are the people that are not in the formal employment surviving? So this is why the importance of the informal economy numbers becomes important, so that we know what is happening. And therefore the interventions that will be required by government to enable that sector for people to participate. And lastly, what fiscal policy interventions, HOD, given that your department is responsible to allocate the financial resources for this province and these municipalities. What fiscal policy intervention, given the data that you are seeing, that you had made informed by this mayor, including the infrastructure investment in which areas? Because that for me is very important. We know we sit in these committees. So I do not want the response to actually rehash information that we know. I'm looking for that is going to actually respond to the very things that I think in your recommendations, I think you speak about the SWOT analysis that you do, and then you talk about key implications for policy planning and budgeting. Because the question is, what's the point of research if it does not inform policy? So if you are sitting as a department that is responsible for the distribution of financial resources, are you practicing what you are preaching? Are you using, just within the provincial, and not even talking about the municipalities now, are you, with this data, utilizing this particular data to engage the provincial departments, including your departments, to help with those? And that is why I'm saying, give me one of the fiscal policy intervention that you have done based on the information you're getting from Mero. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Member Mkondlo. Member Stoffel.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. And once again, good morning, everyone. And let me appreciate the presentation from both the officials. Thank you. Chair, mine is on the first presentation. There was a statement from the presentation that is saying there's access to markets is a problem. Maybe you should then maybe a bit give flesh to that. And then also, Chair, in terms of the weaknesses, there's persistent spatial inequality with sufficient disparities between affluential and economic and nodes and disadvantaged communities. That statement is coming for very long in these presentations of yours. Want to know, what are you going to do? What is the plan to address that issue? What is the plan? Because we cannot have each and every presentation the same reflection, but you are expecting at some time there should be at least some progress within trying to address the issue. So maybe because the presentation is a very short thing, so maybe you can expand also on that to say, for how long are we going to sit with, or is there any progress or attempt to address that kind? And then also, many members have touched on it. Out of these job losses, how many of that job losses was permanent jobs? Out of that 24,000, and even in what kind of jobs was that? Did that jobs include the low-skilled people also? Then my third question is in terms of the high cost of affordability and constraints. Now everyone have touched on it. And if we can go even deeper, there was even a kind of a court case against the city of Cape Town about the high tariffs and high. So what kind of impact does it have on this economical? And then, Chair, I'm not sure. Can I couple the presentations, or should I just focus on one? Or
No, you can.
Can I couple it?
Yes.
Yeah. Then I will go to the presentation of Beaufort West. Here again, Chair, It's also coming for very long. There was an appeal for very long from members to say the issue of economic development within Beaufort West itself should be looked at. Because remember, Beaufort West is where people enter and it's where people go out. And for very long now, we are listening to this. And especially when it comes to this agriculture that you are talking about. If Chair, we can go and analyze and go deeper into this agriculture. It should be more specific. What agriculture are you talking about? Are you talking about because we are sitting with a lot of farmers, some informal, some formal, that is not really benefiting anything. And when I go deeper, I can go even and say, I'm talking more about township economy within Beaufort West itself. Because you will get more informal farmers than formal farmers. So I want to know, since we have registered this issue for very long, what is the plan in terms of addressing so that they can also get to a formal or register to in the formal industry itself? I'm not sure whether you captured you can capture me there, but and also the rising electricity is not only for that area. City of Cape Town, all the municipalities is faced with the same thing. And also more especially West Coast, also transport issues is also a problem, and so forth and so forth. So what I'm saying is, now that we have these threats, what is there to counter these threats? What are we doing about these threats? Because this threat is coming very long now. What are we doing about this? So I will pause for now.
Thank you, Member Stoffel. Member Boyson.
Thank you, Chairperson. Chairperson, I'm going to sound like a crybaby. And the reason for that, Chairperson, is that I don't think it's questions that I'm having, but I'm going to allude to observations. And I want to appreciate the presentations in the sense that it's very informative, and I see potential. And this is what I'm going to allude to, because some of these issues, Chairperson, somebody must force the issue, on economic growth to happen at the levels where we intend it to happen. And I'm going to base mine on Central Karoo being assigned to Laingsburg. But again, Chairperson, I'm just going to put it out there, and I think the professionals would know how to respond to it, and without being dragged into politics, because some of these things, the local municipalities must make the decisions probably for certain investments, Chairperson. But then, Chairperson, surely if it comes to the metro, what is happening at the port, always being insufficient, ineffective, etc. So surely, although the metro keeps on being the best metro in the country, surely if we can fix the port and have it to a standard, to an international standard, that should actually take us to a higher level. But then again, who must fight that fight for that to happen? And that's just an observation. But then Central Karoo, and it is other spheres of government that I think, again, we should go and engage them. You look at Beaufort West, Spoornet and Transnet's infrastructure in Beaufort West and in Laingsburg is dormant. We see the potential One doesn't know why those buildings aren't utilized or rented out or being used to attract investment. Again, who should go and fight that battle to Spoornet, to Transnet, for those local municipalities to get on board, because that infrastructure is just dormant as we speak. And observation obviously is that if that infrastructure can be economically revived, surely we'll have a better picture when we look into the next marrows that needs to follow. We refer to the Central Karoo being well known for livestock, etc. There's a lot of what is it called? Subsistence farmers. You know, one not in any streamline whatsoever. They're not even formalized, but you can see that they are growing and it's a potential. Again, how can we get them into mainstream? In Laingsburg, for instance, there are abattoirs that are also dormant. But everybody speak about sheep farming, that I'm asking myself the question, where are they processing the sheep? If the abattoirs are also dormant, Laingsburg specifically, you know, then again, who should go and revive those abattoirs so that we can have a better marrow picture coming this time in the new financial year? And you look at their golf courses in the Central Karoo. Again, those golf courses, thorn bushes are growing on those golf courses. But whose door must we go and knock, and who should go and knock on those doors? Because again, there's potential. Laingsburg in particular, to be specific, the golf course. Cows are grazing on the golf course. There's potential for recycling, chairperson. There's this new phenomenon now, green energy, wind farming, turbines, etc. It's a big thing. Nobody's talking about landfill sites and the potential of landfill sites, you know, and the legal threats around landfill sites. The green scorpions are going to hit these municipalities, but then again, those landfill sites is just everybody do what they want. And then again, the potential of recycling, the potential of composting, etc. And I'm talking again about Laingsburg. You know, so chairperson, I'm just throwing that out there as potential economic spinners. And if we as the politicians need to go and knock on those doors, surely we can get that answer. And if it's the professionals, we will help the professionals. But surely we can't, because I'm seeing the marrows as reporting on outcomes. And I would love the marrows also to fight the potential on generation of economic offspins. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Member Boyson. I think perhaps if I can just add to perhaps some comments here and before we answer, and that's sort of, I'm going back to what I raised in terms of labour absorption and this very tough situation that we have, I think has been, as we have mentioned here, that we sit with underdevelopment in areas that really need to be absorbing labour and where there needs to be economic activity. And obviously we talk there about manufacturing and industries. And we went through this mantra in the world of, if you can buy it cheaper elsewhere, then you don't manufacture locally. And to me, somewhere along the line, what was forgotten in that little story was the fact, how do you employ people? You know, where does the work come from? How are people economically active? I think what we've also sort of covered here is that the team are actually the recorders of what has taken place outside. And the question then is, how do we translate the diagnosis, in a sense, that we're having? How do we translate that into some form of action and some form of activity? And I think some of the colleagues you have mentioned is, what is the impact then on budget in terms of what we are doing? Because, as I mentioned earlier, if we look at the SWOT analysis and we look at the weaknesses and we look at the threats and we look at the opportunities, there is in effect a whole list of issues that possibly should be addressed. And, how does one swing that into that role? And, what we as a committee then can do. So I think with that, we handing over to you, HOD, and to the team then probably for some wisdom on what has been put forward, and then after that we can have another round of questions.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to start, and then I think the team can fill in where I might miss something, because I'm sure I'm going to miss a few things. But let me start off with, I think, the question, what has changed? And I think what we can see, and I think all three presenters spoke to the issue of where we were coming from in terms of COVID and what happened in COVID, and that there was, in terms of that period, being resilient and showing resilience under pressure. It was obviously a difficult period, and when we look at what was presented just in terms of GDPR, in all three instances, we've seen that there has been recovery. So what we're looking at now in particular is to grow and to expand. And so that is the difference. And I think our next iteration of the MERO will really speak to the nitty-gritty in terms of the growth and the expansion. And I think as we, and I'm sure Owen will be able just to speak a little bit on that. So for me, there has been progress from the previous MERO that was published and the research done to this one that we are sitting with the committee, and we can easily see now in terms of where do we need to go and what we're trying to address with the third one. Not as a provincial treasury, but in terms of the evidence that we are putting out there. And I'll come to the question around how our fiscal policy then try to begin to put some of the building blocks in place in order to create the platform for growth and expansion. And then the question around whether what we're doing, will it get us to the breakout growth that we require in terms of G4J? I think it's a process. And I think what we will also need to keep in mind, what would be the basics that any economy would require in order for it to grow? Basic things: water, electricity. And I think Operation Vulindlela addresses and the work that has been done on that end begins to address some of the challenges that we see within that space. Traditionally, our economy, and the team can expand on it, we are talking about outbreak growth. Our growth has always mirrored that of national. As a subnational, our growth has always mirrored that. And so when we then consider the issues in terms of what we then look at to support us getting to that growth within G4J, it was about energy and water resilience, and that is what the recommendations that we also put through to Cabinet. It was around investment and export promotion. It was around skills and employability pathways. And I think the team in their reflections in terms of what the evidence is showing us, there's a link between what this evidence is showing us and what these priorities were that we focused on in terms of the growth for jobs strategy. And I'm saying this understanding that we're dealing with a constrained, within a constrained fiscal environment. But the issues around transport and mobility. You would need to get your goods to market, to be able to transport people. So then infrastructure becomes important within that context. And then also the making it easier for the private sector to do business with. Just to do business, or the ease of doing business. And then I think ultimately the space that we find ourselves in is in terms of the regulatory framework, where we need to play an active role, and are playing an active role, just in terms of making sure that that environment, or that we influence the type of decisions or policy directions taken based on the evidence that we are putting into the system. So maybe just to provide the detail, if we're saying energy and water, if we agree that those are the some of the fundamentals that would need to put in place, how did the fiscal policy or the recommendations that we made to Cabinet respond to that? So in total, and it cuts across, because G4J is not a departmental specific responsibility. There's a number of PFAs, and different departments take responsibility for different aspects of the G4J strategy. So when we're talking energy and water, that allocation covers a number of departments: the Department of the Premier, Education, Health and Wellness, Environmental Affairs, Infrastructure, Agriculture, Economic Development and Tourism, and Local Government. And all of these players have got a contribution to make, and were put in a position to respond to what G4J then requires in relation to that specific aspect of the strategy. And then for water in particular, just in terms of our provincial mandate, it is the Department of Environmental Affairs and Development Planning and Agriculture, as well as the Department of Local Government. So this budget maybe, and I can go through the detail, but what I'm trying to convey to the committee is to say, by looking at what would be the fundamental things that we would need to have in place in order to unlock the type of growth that we want to see, there is a measure of responsiveness from a fiscal perspective in how we deal with it. In terms of infrastructure, which I think there's universal acceptance that infrastructure is a lever for growth, then it means we would need to look at what then do we put. And if we look at the construction industry, I think the colleagues also said, in terms of the sectors, there is great potential for us to expand, and that is an area where one could be creating the jobs that we're looking for, and then getting to that growth. So that was also a particular important area in considering the recommendations then that we ultimately made to Cabinet. Obviously, population growth backlog in terms of services, there's no way that we would be able to really respond from a constrained environment to the magnitude than what is required. And hence, we are looking at how do we actually leverage what we have, what is available, how then do we bring the private sector in a much more I'm going to use the word aggressively. It might not be the correct word to use, but get them to participate in how then do we unlock some of the infrastructure backlogs that we currently have in the province. And I think there's some exciting things happening in the system, and I'm sure the various departments will come back and report on that. We are certainly working towards getting our executive to make some, I think, exciting things happening within the space in order to finance our infrastructure portfolio. And then municipal investment readiness, and I'm sure we're sitting here with the local government budget office. I'm sure they can touch on a lot of the things that we're doing within that space. But Chair, in a nutshell, I think the growth for jobs allocation, it cuts across a number of departments because everybody, in terms of the PFAs, have got a role to play, and different departments actually take the lead on some of these things. And I think our provincial budget actually tries to respond to some of the pressures in the system, given the current constraints that we are also facing. I think I'm going to leave it to the team in terms of the informal sector. I think Member Bryant had an observation in terms of the cost of living in the metros. Then also, I think Member Boyson, not necessarily a question, but we've taken note of the comments. And then Member Stoffel, and if there's anything else that I might have missed, please come in and fill the gap. So I don't know, from between Owen, you want to go first, and then you direct the team. Thanks.
Thank you, HOD. Thank you, members. Maybe just a few points that I can make. But I think the HOD's covered a lot of it already. But in terms of the growth outlook, we are the province is severely constrained by what happens at the national economy. So we hope to raise our growth level above the level of the national economy, and we have done that successfully. But our role is slightly limited, and we're also limited in terms of what we can do fiscally, because so much of our the revenue that comes into the province comes from the national fiscus. So what we can do is try to make room within that allocation, and also find new ways to expand those allocations that we're getting from national, and then use them and devote those new resources into growth and promoting G4J. So hopefully we can make some big announcements at the time of the budget, which will answer some of those questions. There were quite a few. I think the port was mentioned a few times, and I think it was mentioned as, in terms of context of the city, it is obviously a constraint on the growth of the city, but it's also a constraint on the rest of the province, because so much of agricultural production goes through that port. And as we've seen, the rural areas are very dependent on agricultural economy. So it is a massive constraint on the economy as a whole. Yeah, and I think I'll hand over to Malcolm.
Thank you, Owen. So I'm going to respond to a few of the issues that were raised, specifically with regards to the informal sector. So the question was, what is an informal sector? So by definition, an informal sector is a business where workers operate outside the government registration, legal regulation, and taxations. So typical examples of these are street vendors, local spaza shops, and casual day labor. And they, in the main, they rely on cash transactions, and there's also a lack of written contracts, and it does not provide legal or social security protection. So the key characteristics of informal businesses: they are unregistered, the businesses lack official licenses, permits, or corporate registration. They don't contribute to taxes, and there's no contracts in place. The operations are normally small, and they operate with the minimal capital. As far as the size of the informal sector in the Western Cape, based on the data that we've seen from Stats SA, it puts the informal labor force in the Western Cape between 11 to 13%. That's about 240,000 people. And that is significantly below the national average, which stood at about 21%. So there has been some growth trends in terms of the informal sector, and this has also been highlighted in various payrolls, which highlight a 19.5% growth in terms of the informal sector from 2020 to 2025. What we've also seen now is that a high level of skills people entering into the informal sector, it is difficult for them to access formal jobs. Just with regards to the issue of the affordability of electricity, I think one needs to remember that municipalities in the main, they are not electricity generators. They are distributors of electricity. So in the main, they buy electricity from Eskom and they distribute it to the households. So municipalities are price takers, if I can put it in that way. And the price at which they buy and sell electricity is regulated by NERSA. They can make a small margin, and based on the motivation that they provide to NERSA. How municipalities manage that is that they set what do you call it, incremental tariff bands. So what you find in the first band, people would normally pay lower for the first band, and as you consume more electricity, then you would pay higher. So that is almost like a distributive effect to make it more affordable for those at a lower band that cannot afford electricity. Coupled to that, municipalities are also getting from the local government equitable share a subsidy that they can give to the poor as part of the free basic services. So that should in the main cover the poor. What municipalities have done is they've increased the basket, if I could put it that way, of the quantum of the electricity that they provide to the poor. The other question that was also raised with regards to income levels. So in a low economic environment, what we've experienced is you've got low economic growth, high population growth. So the measure that we use is GDP per capita to determine if income has grown or not. But what we've seen due to the two effects, low economic growth, high population growth, your GDP per capita has over time regressed slightly. Another measure of income is also in the Gini coefficient. So what it does, it measures the number between 0 and 1, where 0 indicates perfect equality and 1 indicates high levels of inequality. What we've seen across all the districts is over time, the income inequality is measured by the Gini coefficient has dropped from, for example, in the Cape Metro, in 2014, it was 0.632. In 2024, it was 0.614. In the Western Cape as a whole, it was 0.615, and it dropped to 0.595. So there has been an improvement in income inequality. Thank you. Ashley and Keith.
I think Malcolm has captured everything. I don't want to belabor it and go too much into the economics. I think what you're asking for is practical questions from a policy perspective, is to say, how do we actually grow? And the economic situation, look, we've been doing this Meadow since 2010. So we're sitting with the data 100%. But we are merely messengers of the news, whether that news is positive or not. The purpose of the Meadow, the purpose, let me just put it out there and where it comes from so you understand the journey. I'm not disputing what you're saying, but I'm saying that the Meadow encapsulates all the economic data, and in one house, in one housing, in one booklet, we are able to say this is the picture of the economy. What happens post that, as my HOD has alluded to, there are policy programs and you know, for the budgets at a provincial level that ultimately aim to address that, and it does get taken into consideration. She's on my neck for this thing, I can guarantee you. We're currently writing the new one for September. There are a lot of sleepless nights that go into this because we have to factor in all of this. But from where we sit at the province, we distribute it down to our partners at the local government level. Local government, so a lot of what you asked, that if I can answer that, I would like to have a stick, and I'm a bit outspoken on this from an economic perspective. Please, I'm not a politician, but I want to have a stick to go into local government councils to say, guys, Your informal sector policy, where does that form part of your local economic development strategy? And I can tell you, you'll be hard pressed to find that. Where is your informal sector policy forming part of your LED strategy at a local council level? Therein lies the number one problem. Your operating budget, be the budget office. So bring it back to our passion of economics and what we train to do. We take it to the budgets through our sign process where we interrogate 30 municipal budgets. The economist in me asks, where is the economic stimulus in the design of your budget, right or wrong? I'm not going on the politics. I'm saying for all 30 municipalities, right? That covers the entire political spectrum. So I'm saying park the politics. I'm saying in terms of the budget, the economist in me is not satisfied. Those LED strategies remain undercooked. And I remember in 2010, there was an excuse. In 2010, there was an excuse. There was no central housing of information. That excuse no longer exists 16 years later. You've got the mirror document and it's deep, and we're sitting with all the Excel files, which can go even deeper onto various questions that you might be. But to wrap up and not to belabor the point, I think Malcolm explained the informal sector and basically what it looks like. When you say you asked the two interesting questions, remember when you said what is the structural mismatch hindering growth? So we're talking about the data, but why are we not growing? And then also explain what do you mean by access to market. So your informal sector conservatively sits at about 1/5. So 1/5 of, let's take the city of Cape Town, all those numbers that are presented, right? 20 to 25%, that's your informal sector. That's conservative. I think it could even be higher. Okay. So your employment and your GDP, so that's a sizable economy. That's just in a black hole. That's not really accounted for. The access to market refers to the value chains. So in English, what I mean by that is the big trawling fishing. So let's take fishing of Cork Bay, which was key to the communities along there from Lavender Hill all the way through to Makassar and Ocean View. Okay, and take it on a micro example. Those fishing quotas are not given to those fishermen. In fact, I spoke to a fisherman on the rocks at Enrico's restaurant in Plettenberg Bay, remember, where you took me to when you were mayor of Plettenberg, of Bito, back in the day. And I said to him, what, you're a fisherman? He says, yes, I stay in the council area over here. I said, but why? And you're not fishing today? He says, no, because National took the quotas away from us. I'm not getting into the politics. I'm saying how it is, what happened. So he says he no longer has a permit. They have to go through the bigger boys. So your SMME, what I'm saying is that so your SMME informal sector links to the economy. It's the soft but very important link. Does that person have an actual link into that economy to purchase from primary sector where the fishing happens through to the agro processing into the manufacturing, which is key, and that grows the economy through to the tertiary sector. And then it's stuff like infrastructure as well, which improves access to market. I'll take an example. I drove the road from this weekend from Cape Town out into Stellenbosch, Baden-Powell, and then you turn left, and that's now a double carriageway. 100% that gives greater access to the back end of Khayelitsha for access to the farms for people that are involved in agricultural activity in Khayelitsha. 100% it improves it, but that is a softer one. Your structural shifts. So if I'm looking at Transnet and Transnet in particular from rail to stimulate a regional economy in the movement of goods. Rail is the most efficient and the cheapest, but our rail system has come under scrutiny. Now that doesn't sit with the municipality. That sits with IGR up at national again. So hopefully through whichever political intervention we can, but I don't want to go there. But from an economics perspective, that's where it sits. So the municipality can have that in its LED strategy, but the capability doesn't sit within that municipal council. And then lastly, the one key takeaway I'd like you to take away from all of this is to say that, cost of living is there, job losses are there. That is something that we have to potentially answer you to. It's very important that and we do have that info, but just not here. It's sitting in the Excel sheets. The structural mismatch is, simply put, it comes down to infrastructure. Now, infrastructure is a loosely used word. Yeah, what infrastructure? There's hard infrastructure and there's soft infrastructure. So the soft infrastructure is the skills mismatch. Does a job leaver, let's take youth unemployment in this country, because it will potentially cripple this economy nationally. Youth unemployment from Polokwane through to Gauteng to the city of Cape Town. Youth unemployment to areas of the economy that are not affluent. They didn't go to the fancy private schools. They attended a normal government secondary school. What is the skills program? Now, again, that falls within a municipal LED strategy as a starting point. So the skills mismatch. There are businesses looking for skilled workers, but if you're not skilled, you're unemployable. And it's also partly, again, I don't want to go into the politics of it, but you can't avoid it. It's partly where the xenophobic tension comes from, because by and large, your foreign nationals that have come in to take the jobs are at a higher skilled level for those particular jobs I'm talking about in manufacturing. Okay, and I'll leave that there. So that's your soft. Your hard is your hard infrastructure. Is basically is your public transport system connecting communities. So we see this also in the periphery municipalities outside of the city. Councillor puts up his hand. No, he wants a housing development over there. He promised it. Fine, take your housing development over there. Whatever, it gets passed off in council. But that housing development is not part of any social development framework feeding into the economy and the socio-economy of that municipality. They've built that housing development on the east end of the town. There's no public transport network to connect that back to the economic nodes, and it happens on the outside of the city and within the city as well. I'll park that there.
Yeah, my colleagues have answered most of the questions, but just going to Beaufort West, the informal economy there, and I think that the trend in the Central Karoo is that because of all the conditions, the economic hardship that people experience there, they resort to survivalist activities, and that's how they land up in the informal sector, as Malcolm defined. But getting to the formalization of these informal farmers or workers, and that must come from certain policy interventions. It requires a multi-sectoral intervention. So now, from our side, and our main intention with the Mero is to make sure that as a document with a lot of economic intelligence that applies to municipalities, we make sure that it lands in the integrated development plans of municipalities. And when it lands in the integrated development plans, then it becomes part of the 5-year strategy of the municipality. It should become part of their priorities, and if they implement that, then they must make sure that they resource that strategy. So where the formalization of the informal farmers are concerned, this is where the multi-sectoral approach comes in. Other national as well as provincial departments that's involved. And as far as I know, the Department of Rural Development, they are specifically involved in that aspect, in formalizing some of these informal farmers and workers, or workers on farms specifically. So the municipality, and this is now all the sectors that must work in this regard, should come up with a plan, policy, and make sure that this situation is addressed. But from our side, we provide the intelligence to the municipality. Yes, we have an oversight role as the provincial treasury, but and we give them all the tools that they need. And as without blaming anyone, the implementation of our policies and programs in our country, there we can improve a lot. So thank you. That's all that I want to say about that.
Sorry, Chair, if I can just come back on a few issues that I should have mentioned beforehand. Firstly, on the informal sector, I think members are 100% correct to be raising the issue of the informal sector. South Africa has a much smaller informal sector than other economies at a similar level of development. So it is, if you're looking at comparing our economy with our peers in terms of development, it's an obvious area where we should be doing a lot better. And I think Ashley's also exactly correct that it is an area where municipalities can make a big difference in terms of connecting informal traders into formal networks and giving them access to demand for their product as well. So it is something that we want to see more of. And sorry, affordability I didn't speak about, but I mean there's a massive issue with affordability in terms of property. That's it's a problem throughout the world, but I think it is particularly acute here in the Western Cape, and hopefully what it will also provide over time is a market signal that construction firms will come into that on a massive basis and increase the quality and quantity of housing. That's obviously something that we need on a very large basis. And then, sorry, there was a question about municipal infrastructure. One of the concerns, there are a whole lot of problems in that area, but one of the problems has been affordability of financing, so that the municipalities, and particularly the smaller municipalities, aren't able to borrow from financial sector, from your formal banks at a reasonable rate. So we are working on some policy ideas, and we hope to make some announcements fairly soon about some mechanisms to improve that sort of borrowing. Thank you.
I mean, that takes care of the first round of questions, but let me just say, Ashley's statement, one can see that the team is extremely passionate about it, so maybe I need to sit on a few people's necks. Okay, thanks, Chair.
Yes, certainly I can see that level of passion, and I think it is it's really good work that you are doing, and it's very important that this data, well, first of all, collated and then being shared out and made available. And, I think it's important too that our municipalities are very aware and start applying the data that is available. I see Member Bryant's hand, and, I'm just looking if there are any other questions that we could be taking. I think Member Stoffel and Member Nkondlo that we have, and then Member Murray. Right, okay, you can go ahead, Member Bryant.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks for those responses. I'll be very quick. I'm glad that the issue of fishing and fishing allocation and fishing rights was mentioned, although it doesn't fall under the jurisdiction of the Western Cape government or that of any of our municipalities, and it all sits squarely with the national government and the Department of Forestry, Fisheries and the Environment. I think it is often misunderstood sector because of the fact that there are these three distinct aspects, being your commercial, your recreational, and your small scale as well. And I think there needs to be greater cognizance and appreciation given of the fact that it is very, very difficult for those who wish to aspire to become commercial fishermen, fisher folk, to do so in the current setup, due to the fact that it is an extremely difficult and expensive industry to get involved in. And even those who have boats will often struggle to make use of those, taking into consideration the red tape. I do think that it's something that's being worked on, but in particular, the relationship with the small scale industry and the cooperatives along our coastline, that really is a huge opportunity with the Western Cape having over 80% of all the fish stocks. So I do think at some stage, Chairperson, perhaps it's going to be a bit of a stretch to try and do it this year with everything that's going on. But I really think going forward, we must have a more detailed presentation on the fishing industry and perhaps invite somebody from the National Department so that we can have a broader understanding of what the roles and responsibilities are and where we can get involved, possibly to assist in some way. So I don't require a response. It's really just an input, and thank you.
Thank you, Member Bryant. We're then moving to Member Stoffel, then Member Nkondlo and Member Marie, and I think sort of just reminding that we've only got about 35 minutes left.
Thank you, Chairperson. Thank you, Chairperson. Chair, I just want to appreciate the response. Yes, although some of the response, but it's fine. I just want to put the emphasis on the statement that was being said by one of the presenters about the budgeting of the municipality. It's a great concern because as long that budget that doesn't include what is addressing this problem, we're going to sit with this problem every time. They are coming with presentations as if it's a recording, because the issues that involve 80% the municipalities. Now, I want to know from the HOD. I want to know how are we going to enhance, to sort out this problem that we are sitting, some of these problems that we are sitting, because I believe there should be a strong engagement between these various departments. There's a need for it in order to address these issues. Otherwise, we are going to ask every year the same things, the same story. As I have indicated, that guy, the member of Beaufort West, was still here and he was hammering on these issues. And still it's there and it's still coming up. So. And even if this growth for jobs, if you look into this program, there's not really jobs here been created. But we don't want to go and have it as if we just want to criticize. We don't want to criticize here, but at some stage we have to face the reality, especially when it comes to these rural areas. There's no jobs. So, Chair, I will pause there with the hope, the emphasis should then from this HOD, from your side and your team, to have that discussion, even with the MEC, to have that discussion to say, look, this thing got a bad reflection to us when we present our payroll, when we present our mayor. Yes, we are going to discuss in detail when it comes maybe to the mayor about these issues. But I mean, for the sake of the presentation, we have to highlight this. So thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Member Stoffel. I think an important point there. Member Nkondlo.
Thank you, Chair. I think, Chair, I want to emphasize the point to the colleagues that they must be assured and they must have trust and confidence that we understand fully the G4J, because it has been presented to us many a times. Ministers have raised it in the House, and even when you budget, we understand it fully that the G4J is not implemented by yourselves as Provincial Treasury only. So I want to put that up front, so that there's a clear appreciation on your side that when we are asking questions, it is not in any way because we are lacking that particular understanding. So the point that we are raising is that because you are part and a very important part of that strategy, because you finance that strategy, and financing that strategy meaning you are looking at utilizing the fiscus to derive the type of a R1 trillion economy and the type of number of jobs that we are acquiring. So that is the reason that we're going to ask you questions here, and some we will take based on your response to those various departments. So I think I wanted to put that disclaimer up front so that that matter does not lose colleagues perhaps to think that we are missing that particular understanding. The point one would have wanted to understand, HOD, is that what exactly are you financing? And I think this is the question we've also asked the minister. What is it that you are financing? Let's take, and I'm very happy with the colleague there at the back, as an economist, although we in between delves into politics and want to say avoid politics. Unfortunately, politics are the other side of the economy, of economics. So there's no way of actually being say you can speak economics outside of politics. So, but I'm very happy that at least you try to come closer to what we're trying to understand. The point for me is that in the G4J plan, when the plan or the G4J strategy was launched in 2023, surely even in the development of that strategy, you knew that you are part of a national economy and the national economy is constrained. So there's nothing new. That is not a discovery. That we know we all stay here, we're citizens of South Africa. So that is not an issue. When you say HOD, you've spoken about an outbreak growth. This is why one is asking. When you look, 2023, we've actually concluded almost 3 calendar years. It may be 2.5 fiscal years, but it's 3 calendar years. I'm asking the question, when you are looking at the growth numbers using just these 3 municipalities, where are we? It is our responsibility. We're talking about the 2035, we're seeing our economy. What, should we go back to the drawing board and review what was our ambitious? Actually, we asked this question also to Minister Mayor, and he gave his own response that actually he believes we're going to have to go to the drawing board because it doesn't seem we're going to achieve that. So we're asking you because you are financing. So the question we are raising is that when you look at this, because this particular research helps you to be able to make those fiscal decisions much more wiser. So for me, I think it is important to get a very clear answer, that is going to keep us as we go and engage with all the other departments that we engage with. Safe to say, colleagues, I think the question about the informal sector, everybody talks about it. But the point, even with the municipalities, the honorable colleague has indicated that you would ask municipalities, when you are financing, and we are asking you as provincial treasurer, because we're not going to ask other people that are not in the room, in you putting up budget, because these budgets, they come to you, you consider them. Are you, as people who are seeing this, are you seeing the Department of Local Government, for as an example, the Department of Economic Development did that? Are you seeing a move into financing or in their programming, moving to integrate informal sector? Because you are approving the budget. So you can't say your hands are tied on this particular matter. Because this is a question that we're asking year in and year out, but it seems every time the answer is the same. So I am asking once again, what are you financing in as far as the informal sector is concerned through the other departments that are responsible to ensure that the informal sector is enabled, like we do with private sector, especially, the high-end commercial level. So I'm interested to understand that. And then with the issue of the renewables as an opportunity in most of these, how are we dealing? And I want to link this chair with skills development. How are we dealing with the fact that currently, if you consider the renewables and what we have seen with the IPPs, mostly they require your high-end skills. And we're talking about a huge number of people that are unskilled or low skilled. So how is the renewables going to assist to absorb? Actually, I don't have the numbers now, and I'm sure you would have those numbers. They're not in education, not in employment, nor in training. They need. We've got a lot of young people that are sitting there that are falling through the cracks. So the renewables at this point, if you talk about, I mean, some of the wind farms, my constituency is in Witzenberg. Actually, we've got, I think, the second wind farm now that is being built there. And when you engage the companies, the Accordia, they will tell you that that type of a development, does not require low level skills. It requires engineering, technical skills. So if you look at that project with the billions that are invested, actually that one is a private investment. It's not even government. But if you look at it, it cannot actually make any significant impact on the employment of the local communities, because what it requires people who've got engineering, and majority of them may not be there. It will have to either take people from Cape Town or other areas. So how are we linking this? Because even, once again, what are we financing? If you look at skills development, we are not seeing any significant or a big boom or pull, into skills development that will then be able to absorb young people in particular who are unemployed. So I'm interested in understanding that. And my last one, Chair, is if you just look at the, I see actually both in the slide. I want to open the slide, colleagues, so that you can, in the metro, I think it's the number slide number 4, the 2021. If you look at the 4% growth of 2021, and I'm coming back to my question around the relationship of the growth of the economy, the industries versus employment. I'm going back to that issue. So if you look at 2021 as an example, you've got there a 4% growth. And if you then go to the slide, I'm not sure what's going on with my laptop here. If you go to the slide, I think it's slide 10, then on the number of, I think it's the GDP growth versus the unemployment rate in 2021. If I'm able to read that correctly, it indicates that there was a growth in jobs, if I'm reading it properly. And I think even with the West Coast, I'm seeing a similar trend. What I was asking is whether in those in that particular scenario, given the response that you gave of low growth versus population growth, I'm asking here, you've got an increase in growth. So what in that specific year, what then would have been the employment numbers, but also the quality and the incomes? Because I want to understand very well what you were raising, that when there is a low growth, surely we cannot expect that incomes will grow. So will the inverse be correct when the growth has increased, in this instance in 2021, where employment numbers have also gone high? So should we assume that in those in that 2021, the incomes would also have grown of those that were in the labor market? So that was my question. Thank you so much, Chair.
Thank you very much, Member Nkondlo. Then we go to Member Murray. And I think your question there, thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I must appreciate also the passion that I hear in the voices. I'm not present in the sitting today, but I'm online. But to hear the passion of the department for what they do is admirable and really appreciated. I want to just mention that it is mentioned spatial inequality. There's significant disparities between the affluent economic nodes and disadvantaged communities. Chair, I believe that we really need to look at spatial planning and whether municipalities still do spatial planning in advance. You know, when the budget committee has to consider all this information, we also need to know what is the future planning municipalities have put in place in terms of the design for their region. And I just feel that there is no such plan in place, and I want to hear from whether the department has such plans presented to them way in advance, 5 or 10 years in advance of what they're working towards. We have municipalities building houses, but there's no economic or opportunities there, and there are no transportation, provided to economic opportunities. It makes the job very tough. It's a very tough environment we're in. I also want to touch on the fact that, for example, the region wasn't mentioned today, but Premier Foods is a canning factory that has also now announced that potentially 3,000 employees, that is a combination of seasonal workers and permanent workers, are about to lose their jobs. Now, the agricultural sector is a very important part of the Western Cape. And I want to know from the department whether they have also assessed or have information on the canning factories of these regions, embedded in these regions, and if there are any similar risks, coming our way, and how that, what is our response going to be in terms of that particular scenario playing itself out again in these regions, and that is obviously due to national government's foreign policy that's affecting export pricing. So I just feel, Chair, that I appreciate the department's inputs, but I also realize that there is nothing that happens in isolation. Everything is connected, but we need to have a future vision for the Western Cape. Municipalities must have a future vision for their region so that they can be, advanced, or at least planning for the eventuality and realization of that plans. There's so many housing being built, but it's disconnected from what the economy or how the rest of the design of the region and of the province. Perhaps it's a lot of comments in between my questions, but I wanted to just put this on the table today and also express my appreciation. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Member Maria. I'm going to hand over to HOD and the team, I think, to give us responses here, and in fact to wrap up the session. We'll be having another session on the other regions coming shortly, and I think what we are dealing with here are also a number of the broader issues that we are emerging, and naturally we can continue that discussion when we have the rest of the regions. So I think if we could deal with the matters that have been raised now, that would be appreciated, HOD.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to start with Member Maria's question in that order, and then I'll try and work my way back, but where I also missed something, I think I'm going to also ask the team. So I'll first start with municipalities do have a capital expenditure framework. It is in place. And I think if we want to get to, and to link it back to the whole discussion around growth, so if we want to get to that 3 to 4% growth scenario, then what the focus should be within a municipal space would have to be on growth enhancing infrastructure. I'm taking it back again, and we was asking at a municipal level, what would that then entail? It would be issues around waste management, water treatment, those types of things. So those are the basic things, as opposed to just simply replacing an existing asset, but also at looking at then where can they go in order to chase that 3 to 4% growth. But I'm going to ask Ashley also maybe just to expand on that a little bit later on. Then just in terms of the question Member Stoffel asked in relation to, and for me, in trying to understand and reflecting back and responding to it, I think it boils down to us having to improve integration between the departments and how then the departments show up within a municipal space. In relation to the policy priorities that needs to be driven and supported. So it's a bottom up in terms of how does the IDP respond, and can we see direct linkages between the IDP and the PSP? But also then what do we do in order to support the municipality in terms of, not just in terms of the evidence that we put, but practically what are we doing within those spaces where some of these things as it relates to growth then manifests itself, and the issue around local economic development. I think in the first round we touch on the fact that it is a mandate of the municipality, and we've also actually indicated where we already see the gap that is not in place within a municipality. But if I circle it back to integration, and then we must talk about what I think the process DLG is driving in terms of getting us to an integrated work plan. And that is really getting every department to focus on particular challenges within a municipality, or opportunities. Let's not use the word challenge, but opportunities within the municipality. And I think for growth, it is definitely looking at how would the Department of Economic Development show up then in relation to that relationship, if we're talking economic growth within a municipal space. Then I think from where we are sitting, because we're driving the traditional issues around time, also we look at loan applications and we provide feedback on it, is how then do we take what the evidence is showing within the Mero. How does that feature back into our further engagements with municipalities? And also in terms of the allocation that we have from in terms of municipal support, what then do we use to become much more specific in terms of the areas that we would support municipalities in, together with our sister department within the Department of Local Government. Every other department will have to then be part of that integrated work plan. So not every department will have funding to give, but it actually forms part and parcel of their mandate. And so how would they give effect to their mandate as a department in terms of their support to local government? And I think the integrated work plan is that DLG is driving, is beginning to address that. I have to put it also, it's work in progress. I think the reason why we are looking at the integrated work plan is the fact that as provincial departments, it is something that we need to just sharpen our pencils in terms of how then do we show up within a local space in a much more integrated manner. But we take your point, and we definitely take also it back as something that we've discussed, how in terms of the stuff we are responsible for as a provincial treasury, how then do we make sure that this that we are presenting to the committee today lands. Actually touched on the political interface. And we discussed this, for instance, where we provide our report back, whether a municipality is coming for a loan, whether we go in terms of the budget. Those reports must be tabled within council. So from an administrative point of view, there is there's a clear delineation between the administration and the executive arm, but we also need to look at when we do have the evidence, when that report goes to council, does it actually is there a golden thread from this moment where we actually put the evidence in the system, and when we start commenting on what we see happening in municipal budgets, so that councils cannot say that we have not informed them. So I think from a basic PT perspective, that is what we think we can do. And continue to do, but to really sharpen our pencils around some of those things. And then I think for Member Nkonto, in terms of G4J, what are we financing? Obviously, we're financing departmental baselines, but I think the question that is it's a relevant question. The question, and I'm going to give because I think the Department of Economic Development will be in a better position to respond to what they are doing in relation to their mandate within a municipal space. And when we talk about whether it's local economic development, I think there's a number of initiatives that they're running that's within their baseline. But I think in terms of the detail, that department might be the best suited to really look at those issues that's happening within a municipal space. Owen looks like he's ready to go, and Malcolm, and then Ashley.
Okay, thanks, HOD. Just in terms of the renewable energies space, that we don't really anticipate that that's going to create informal jobs directly. As the member said, the jobs that are going to be created there are going to be for skilled people, for engineers. But it would have two impacts on the informal sector that we could identify. Firstly, one of the major constraints on the South African economy has been the lack of energy and lack of electricity supply. So the renewable energy program will alleviate that constraint to an extent. And secondly, by creating more jobs, by increasing output in the economy, we will increase demand. So we may not see it directly. We will see engineers employed rather than people in the informal sector, but we will see that money filtering through the economy. So you will see greater demand for informal construction services, transport services, accommodation, domestic workers, and also agricultural workers. So it's not a direct line, but it would have an impact. And just in terms of the allocations that are made for the informal sector, there is the alternative energy supply system, so that's 15 million rand that was allocated by DDAT for installation of solar PV, and a large amount of money for the informal settlement upgrading program to upgrade informal areas and support businesses, and also through G4J, the red tape reduction reforms, which are aimed at to assist local municipalities to reduce red tape and enable informal traders to increase their output. Thank you.
Thank you. Actually, maybe just to add on to what Owen has also said about the wind farms and the renewable energy. So although there may not be direct employment by those farms, what we also tend to do is also run social CSI programs. So they would issue bursaries to disadvantaged people within the communities. And there's also a link between providing services to the people that's now employed at the plant. So those are areas where the wind farms or renewable energy projects would normally make an intervention into the local economy. Just with regards to Member Mbombo's question about the about the observation about the growth in 2021 in the city of Cape Town and the unemployment rate that didn't go in the same line. So in terms of economics, it is explained as ceteris paribus. It's a Latin phrase that's being used, and what it basically means is all other things being equal, so other things held constant. So in the case, what happened in 2021, it was an anomaly. So the market was disrupted as a result of the COVID pandemic. So what has happened, the economy reset itself to its previous base. So it was more a mathematical correction as opposed to an increase in the real output. But what's also happened is the shock that happened is that the labor supply expanded much more rapidly as discouraged workers also become active work seekers, and there was also a level of automation that accelerated, and then the composition of growth also shifted from high levels to high level skilled finance rather than low skilled labor. So that is the best way that I can explain that phenomenon that happened at a particular point in time. Thank you.
Just to close, there's been a lot of talking, but I do want to, but HOD's asked me to close off on something very important that you raised, and that is spatial planning. And I've been directly involved with the Department of Environmental Affairs and Planning in the province on spatial planning. I think you'll be surprised, and it's good that you've asked this question so I can answer it. You'll be surprised at the level of spatial planning, number one, from the department. And they do, I'm not betting for any departments over here, but they do outstanding work on a national level, because I do know that the national minister checks in with them on capital expenditure frameworks and SDF. But that SDF in particular, for me, that is the LED strategy, because it's the role of us here as government, as provincial government and municipal councils in growing an economy. A municipality, a a mayor cannot create jobs. That's a lie. It's section 15, it goes back to section 152 of the Constitution, the role of local government to create the enabling environment upon which an economy can prosper. And that's what it is. And that is, in a nutshell, without blabbering too much, it's infrastructure, but it's the spatial planning of infrastructure. That spatial planning of infrastructure does happen. I can report because, as our HOD has alluded to, in our engagements, which is the time engagement in February, where we sit with all 30 municipalities and we assess the technical capability of that municipality, which precedes the SIME engagement, where we look at the draft budgets, and it's a hell of a roadshow. It really is. It's intense. We go through the entire budget, the IDP, the strategy docs. The Mero informs that as well in terms of our analysis. So they have it for their planning, but we bring it in as well. And from a spatial planning perspective, municipalities are more often than not in the Western Cape, they're at the forefront. They're not that far behind. They know what they want. They're not. We shouldn't disregard them. So the information is there. The level of spatial planning in the Western Cape at municipal level is at a very, very mature level. Let me say that without overselling it. The capital expenditure framework is something that is housed within that spatial development framework. And that is basically the 10-year plan of what this municipality wants in big bang infrastructure projects and how it plans to fund it. And that's coupled with its long-term financial plan. And to my knowledge, there are about 6 or 7 municipalities that are actively undertaking it in the Western Cape. There's about 3 or 4 that have adopted the capital expenditure framework, and that comes from national, right? And the Western Cape, in that regard, at local government level. So there is good news to this whole story, that from a spatial planning perspective, we are at a mature stage. The constraining issue is, number one, is capacity, because to roll this out, our municipalities, and we see it mature, even in the city, in certain departments, from a capacity perspective, it is constrained. And that holds back development, because you can't implement if you don't have capacity. And then the financing on the fiscus, because the money is not going to come from Pretoria anymore. and that's the long and the short of it. So it's the alternative financing model. But then as the Treasury, and we've done a lot of work on this as well at municipal level. So I can tell you, if you want to know, which municipalities can go, for how much they can go, and for what period, what type of debt they can take on from an alternative. And that's done by our local government accounting unit, who we work with before we engage municipalities. But sorry, that's to answer you on the special plan. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you very much for those responses. I think that is probably a good stage for us to complete our meeting or adjourn our meeting for today. And as indicated to committee, we've got another session on the other regions, and we'll no doubt continue that discussion. But I think at this stage, I want to thank Provincial Treasury, HOD, and your team, and for the work and the passionate work and the passion you've displayed in discussing the regions that we have dealt with today. I think we all realize how important this is, and I think the questioning and the comments coming from members also indicates how important it is that we make sure that G4J is working and that we're getting the level of employment. So thank you very much for being with us. You are now excused, and I think just looking at committee, I think we can continue our discussion when we meet again. So I think I'll adjourn the full meeting.
Yeah. Next
Thank you,
time they will be
Chair.
speaking.
Thank you very much.
Took me to economics one
Yes. Yeah. No, I think it went well. The table has been set. Okay, please.
Yes, I can.
That through.
Thank you, Chair.